I'll start with a concept that it feels almost like a conspiracy theory, but it's actually a really serious rereading of mainstream history.
Mm.
We all learned the same story in grade school. For millions of years, humans were these scruffy, desperate hunter-gatherers.
Right, running around, cold, hungry, always on the brink of starvation.
Yes, and then about 10,000 years ago, this light bulb went on. We planted a seed, we built a farm, we invented civilization.
And suddenly, the story goes, everything got better.
Everything got better. We got smarter, we got safer,
Yeah.
we won.
That is the classic March of Progress narrative. It's a very comforting story.
It is.
It's the story we tell ourselves to justify why we sit in offices all day and stare at screens. We assume that abandoning the wild for the field was this deliberate, intelligent choice.
Made by our brilliant ancestors who wanted a better life for their kids.
Exactly.
Right. But the argument we are unpacking today, it flips that entirely on its head. It suggests that the agricultural revolution wasn't a great leap forward.
No.
Not at all. It was a trap. In fact, some historians are now calling it history's biggest fraud.
It's a strong phrase, but it's meant to be provocative, to shake us out of that old narrative.
And the central idea is that we didn't tame nature. We got enslaved by it. And the scariest part, the part that really resonates today, is that we might still be stuck in that exact same trap.
Just with different tools.
Yeah. Laptops instead of hose.
It is a provocative stance, I'll grant you that. But when you strip away our modern biases and just look at the raw data, the skeletons, the settlement patterns, the actual diet, it becomes a very, very difficult argument to refute.
So to really get this, we have to understand the baseline. What was life like before this supposed fraud?
Okay, so let's set the scene. For 2.5 million years, humans, and we're talking about our whole family tree, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and eventually us, Sapiens, we lived without really intervening in the lives of the plants and animals around us.
2.5 million years. I mean, it's a number that's so big, it's almost meaningless.
It's impossible to visualize, but try this. If all of human history were a 24-hour clock, farming only shows up in the last, 3 minutes.
Wow. So for 23 hours and 57 minutes, we were doing something else entirely.
Exactly. And for that vast, vast majority of time, we were part of the ecosystem, not trying to be its managers. We plucked wild figs where they grew. We hunted wild sheep where they grazed.
We didn't decide where the fig trees should live or which billy goat should mate with which nanny goat.
We just took what was there and, contrary to the whole nasty, brutish, and short stereotype that we have of cavemen.
Right, the grunting guys with clubs.
The evidence suggests this was a rich, complex existence. We had intricate social structures, we had religious beliefs, political dynamics. People weren't just surviving, they were navigating a world that, for the most part, provided for them.
And then, relatively recently, boom, 10,000 years ago, we stop wandering, we pick a spot, and we start obsessively manipulating just a tiny handful of species.
A very tiny handful. Wheat, rice, goats, sheep, pigs. Suddenly, from sunrise to sunset, our focus narrows from the entire forest down to a single patch of dirt.
And the logic on the surface seems totally sound, doesn't it?
It seems completely rational. If I plant the seed and I water it, I get more food. If I get more food, I don't starve. If I don't starve, I'm happy.
It looks like a clear triumph of human intelligence.
It does.
But that's the mission for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
To figure out why that simple, beautiful logic failed so spectacularly. We need to explain how a decision that seems so smart resulted in a life that was, for the average person, physically harder, nutritionally poorer, and arguably just less satisfying.
And to do that, we're going to look at a few key ideas. The wheat trap is the big one. Then there's the physical destruction of the human body, this idea of the luxury trap, which is going to feel very familiar to anyone with a smartphone. And, of course, the dark reality of what we did to animals.
And we also have to talk about Göbekli Tepe, this massive archaeological mystery in Turkey that suggests we might have the whole cause and effect thing completely backwards. Maybe we didn't farm to eat.
Maybe we farmed to worship.
Okay, so let's jump into that first big reversal. This is the one that really messed with my head when I first read about it. We always say, humans domesticated wheat.
Right. It's a simple sentence. We are the subject. Wheat is the object.
We are the active doer. Wheat is just this passive grass.
It feels natural to say that.
Yeah.
Of course it does. We're the ones with the big brains and the opposable thumbs and the tools. But let's just split it for a second. Let's try to look at this from the perspective of the plant.
Okay. But I have to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
How can a grass have a perspective? It doesn't have a brain. It can't think or plan or scheme.
True, it doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't sit there twirling its metaphorical mustache. But in evolutionary biology, success has a very specific, very cold definition.
But here-
Survival and reproduction. Spreading your DNA. That's it, full stop. By that metric, let's look at wheat 10,000 years ago.
Okay.
10,000 years ago, wheat was a nobody. It was an obscure wild grass confined to a pretty small range in the Middle East. It was, just another weed in the grand scheme of things.
Right. Nothing special about it.
Exactly. But then something happens. And within just a couple of millennia, which is a blink of an eye in evolutionary time, this one particular grass spreads all over the Middle East. Then it jumps to Europe, then Asia, then the Americas.
And today it's everywhere.
Today, wheat covers about 2.25 million square kilometers of the globe. That is an area almost 10 times the size of Great Britain.
Wow.
In the Great Plains of North America, where not a single stalk of wheat existed 10,000 years ago, you can now walk for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers and see nothing but wheat. It has utterly conquered the planet.
So purely by the numbers, by that cold evolutionary metric,
Yeah.
wheat is one of the most successful organisms in history.
It is an empire builder. An astonishing success story. And how did it do that? It couldn't move itself. It couldn't clear trees or pull up blocks. It couldn't fight off pests.
It needed a vehicle.
It needed a servant. And it found the perfect one. A restless, energetic, and slightly naive ape called Homo sapiens.
So the argument is that wheat it tricked us,
Yeah.
manipulated us.
In a manner of speaking, yes. From an evolutionary standpoint, wheat domesticated us. Think about what the word domesticate even means.
Okay.
It comes from the Latin domus, which means house. Now, who is the one living in the house?
We are. The wheat is outside in the field.
Precisely. The wheat didn't move into our cave. We stopped wandering and built a permanent house next to the wheat. We became tied to that one patch of land because the wheat demanded it.
Demanded is a strong word, but when you lay out what farming actually entails,
Yeah.
it kind of fits. Because wheat is incredibly high maintenance, isn't it? It's like a diva.
It's unbelievably fragile. For one thing, wheat doesn't like rocks. So sapiens, whose bodies evolved over millions of years for climbing apple trees and chasing gazelles, suddenly spent days on end bending over, breaking their backs to clear pebbles from the soil.
Isn't that what the human body was designed for?
Not even close.
Blah.
And wheat doesn't like sharing its space with other plants, so we spent hours weeding under a scorching sun. Wheat is incredibly thirsty, so we dug irrigation canals and lugged heady buckets of water from rivers. It's completely defenseless against things like rabbits and locusts, so we had to build fences and stand guard all day.
We became its bodyguards.
We became its servants in every sense of the word.
And physically, this just wrecked us. I
Yeah.
think people have this romantic image, of the healthy peasant working in the field.
Sure.
But the skeletons tell a very different story, don't they?
Oh, it's a horror show in the fossil record. It really is.
Yeah.
When you line up a hunter-gatherer skeleton next to an early farmer skeleton from the same region, you see immediate and catastrophic degradation.
Like what?
Yeah.
What are we seeing?
We see slipped discs. We see severe crippling arthritis in the knees and the lower back. We see hernias. The human spine was evolved for an upright, varied range of motion walking, running, climbing, squatting.
Dynamic movement.
Exactly. It was not designed for the repetitive, stooped-over labor of hoeing a field for 12 hours a day. Our bodies paid the price.
So we traded agility and health for chronic pain. And for what? The food must have been better, right? That has to be the payoff. We assume farming gave us this stable, nutritious diet.
That's the other part of the fraud. It was, in fact, a massive diet downgrade.
How so?
Think about the biology of it. A hunter-gatherer is an omnivore in the truest sense of the word. They ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but the menu changed constantly. One day it's berries, mushrooms, and roots. The next day it's rabbit, gazelle, some nuts, maybe some wild honey.
So you're getting a huge spectrum of vitamins and minerals.
You're getting everything. They might eat dozens of different species in a single week. It's a nutritional safety net. If one food source fails, you have 10 others to fall back on.
Okay, now compare that to the farmer.
Now look at the early farmer. His entire life revolves around one, maybe two stable crops. Wheat, barley, maybe some lentils. He eats wheat porridge for breakfast, wheat bread for lunch, and wheat gruel for dinner.
It's just carbs all day.
It's worse than just carbs. It's a monoculture diet. It's calorie dense, sure, so you don't starve to death immediately, but it's shockingly poor in minerals and vitamins. If you don't get enough iron or vitamin C, you get sick.
And we see that in the bones, too.
Absolutely. Early farmers were, on average, shorter than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. They had worse teeth. Farming introduced a plague of cavities and gum disease because of all the starch and sugar in the grains.
And you're completely dependent. You're vulnerable.
Utterly. If that one crop fails, if a drought hits or a fungus, a blight comes through, the farmer starves. A hunter-gatherer in the same situation would just move to a different valley or start hunting a different animal. The farmer had no plan B. His entire world was that field.
This is what I'm really struggling with. It's the central question. We work harder. We get backaches, hernias, and bad teeth. We eat a boring, less nutritious diet. We're stuck in one place, literally living in our own waste because sanitation hadn't been invented yet. Why on earth did we take this deal? If I came to you with a job offer and said, look, it pays less, you have to work 12-hour days of hard manual labor, and it will give you arthritis, you would.
You'd laugh in my face.
You'd call security. And that is the billion-dollar question. Why did we do it? And the answer, the only answer that makes sense, requires us to stop thinking about the happiness of the individual and start thinking like the species. Because evolution is cold. It's an accountant, not a humanitarian. It doesn't care if you're happy. It doesn't care if you're in pain or if you're fulfilled.
It only cares about one thing.
It only asks one question. How many copies of this DNA helix exist in the world?
So quantity over quality. Ruthlessly so. Let's look at the numbers. It makes it really clear. Imagine the Jericho Oasis, let's say around 13,000 BC, before farming. It's a lush spot. It can probably support a nomadic band of about 100 hunter-gatherers.
Okay, 100 people.
And by all accounts, they are healthy, they're tall, they're strong-boned, they have plenty of leisure time, but there's only 100 of them.
100 happy, healthy DNA copies.
Exactly. Now let's fast forward to 8,500 BC. The agricultural revolution has taken hold in Jericho. That same oasis is now a village. The people are working in the fields all day long. They are shorter than their ancestors. They have bad teeth. They are riddled with new diseases that have jumped from their domesticated animals.
Like what?
Tuberculosis, smallpox, measles, all these crowd diseases that can only exist when you have a dense settled population living near livestock. The child mortality rate is sky high, in part because they're weaning babies onto grain paste porridge instead of breast milk, which weakens their immune systems.
It sounds absolutely miserable.
For the individual, it is miserable. But, and this is the key, that village now supports 1,000 people.
A tenfold increase.
From 100 to 1,000. In the cold, hard calculus of evolution, that is a 1,000% profit. The species, Homo sapiens, won. There are more human genomes in existence. The fact that those genomes are walking around inside miserable, aching, sick bodies is completely irrelevant to the evolutionary process.
That is such a grim but powerful distinction. We tend to conflate evolutionary success with life getting better. But a battery hen isn't evolutionary success by that metric. There are billions of them.
Precisely. And we will get to the hen later, I promise. But for humans, this created the ultimate trap. Farming allowed the population to explode, which meant you couldn't go back to hunting and gathering even if you wanted to.
There are simply too many mouths to feed.
The land could no longer support that many people living the old way. The boat had sailed.
I want to touch on the security myth, too. Because even if the work was hard and the diet was bad, people assumed farming at least brought peace and security. You have a home. You have walls. You aren't, running from lions anymore.
Another deeply ingrained misconception. Farming actually trapped people in a cycle of what you could call hyperviolence.
Hyperviolence.
Yeah. Think about the strategic difference between a nomad and a farmer. If a rival band threatens a group of foragers, what do?
They just leave. They pack up and move on. They don't own anything they can't carry.
Exactly. They have no fixed assets. Retreat is a perfectly viable survival strategy. But a farmer has spent years of backbreaking labor investing in those fields. He has irrigation ditches, he has granaries full of food, he has a house.
You get a mortgage.
He's got a mortgage. If a rival group comes over the hill, he can't run. If he abandons his field, he and his family will starve in the winter. So he has no choice. He has to stay and fight to the death.
So every single conflict becomes an existential battle.
It becomes total war. And we see this in the archaeology, but also in studies of simple, non-state agricultural societies, like the Dani or the Enga tribes in New Guinea, before modern contact. In those societies, violence accounted for about 15% of all deaths.
15%. That's 1 in 7 people.
And for men, it was as high as 35%. 1 in 3 men died violently. Those are casualty rates higher than in the First and Second World Wars combined. So the early farmer wasn't just overworked and malnourished. He was also living in constant, profound fear of a raid that he could not escape.
Okay, so we've established it was a truly raw deal, a biological bait and switch. But I'm still stuck on the how. You mentioned we couldn't go back because of population growth, but how did we get fooled in the first place? Surely the first generation of farmers looked at a stalk of wheat and said, you know what? This is way too much work. I'm going back to the forest to hunt.
This is where we get to the luxury trap. And this is the part of the story that I think every single modern listener will feel in their bones. Because the trap works in the exact same way today as it did 10,000 years ago.
The boiling frog effect, right, happens so slowly you don't notice.
Perfectly put. We have to realize this wasn't a single event. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like a tribe held a council meeting and voted all in favor of farming, say aye. It happened over thousands of years, one tiny, seemingly logical step at a time.
So where does it start?
It starts innocently. About 18,000 years ago, the last ice age ends. The climate in the Middle East gets warmer and wetter. And wild wheat, which likes those conditions, starts spreading naturally.
So it's just there. More of it than before. It's free food.
Exactly. Humans start eating more of it because it's abundant. They carry the grains back to their seasonal campsites, they grind it up, and inevitably they drop seeds along the path and near the camp.
So the next year, there's even more wheat growing right where they live.
Convenience. Why walk 5 miles to a wheat patch when there's one growing right outside your hut?
So you stay a little longer.
You stay a little longer. Maybe you burn a few trees to give the wheat patch a bit more sun. A generation later, you're not just staying for 2 weeks to harvest, you're staying for 4, then 6. Gradually, over centuries, the nomadic lifestyle fades. They build more permanent huts.
And then comes the real logic trap, the if I just work a little harder fallacy.
That's it. That's the core of the trap. The thought process of an individual is completely rational. You know, if I just clear these few rocks over here, the harvest will be a little bigger. If I just dig this little ditch to bring water, we won't have to worry so much if it doesn't rain. It's the eternal human hope that if we just work a little bit harder right now, life will be easier in the future.
But they miscalculated the consequences.
They miscalculated spectacularly. They didn't foresee that the little bit of extra food wouldn't lead to an easier life. It would lead to one more child surviving infancy. They didn't foresee that that child would eat up the surplus. They didn't foresee that living in permanent, crowded settlements would become a hotbed for infectious diseases.
By the time they realized that their life was actually harder and more stressful than their grandparents' life.
The trap had snapped shut. They had forgotten how to live the old way. The population was too large to be supported by hunting and gathering anymore. There was no going back.
There's an analogy for this in the source material that is so perfect, it's almost painful. It compares the agricultural revolution to the invention of email.
Yes, this one hits home for me every single day. Think about life before email. If you wanted to send a message to someone far away, you wrote a letter.
You had to find paper, a pen, an envelope, buy a stamp, walk to a mailbox.
It was slow. It took effort.
Yeah.
So because it was hard, people didn't write many letters, and they certainly didn't expect a reply for days or even weeks.
It was inefficient, but there was a certain calmness to it,
Yeah.
a built-in delay.
Right. Then comes email, and what was the sales pitch? It's instantaneous. It's free. You can send a message to anyone, anywhere in 1 second. Think of all the time you'll save.
And the internal logic is, this is great. If I can write a business letter in 1 minute instead of 1 hour, I will have 59 extra minutes to relax and read a book.
But is that what happened? Did we all take that saved time and go sit in a meadow?
Of course not. Not even close.
No. We just massively increased the volume of communication. Now, instead of writing 1 thoughtful letter a month, I receive 100 emails a day. And I am expected to reply instantly. I carry the device in my pocket, so I am never, ever off the clock. We thought we were saving time, but we just revved up the treadmill of life to 10 times the speed.
We thought we were buying convenience, but we were actually buying anxiety.
That is the luxury trap in a nutshell. Luxuries tend to become necessities. And then those necessities spawn a host of new obligations you never even dreamed of. The farmer thought, I'm buying food security for my family. What he actually bought was a life of unending toil and worry. We think, I'm buying a smartphone to save time and be more connected. What we're actually buying is a digital tether that keeps us working and anxious 24/7.
That is profoundly depressing,
Yeah.
but also undeniable.
Huh.
Now, I want to pivot a bit, because up until now, we've been very materialist in our explanation. We've talked about calories, survival, rocks, population density, bad backs. But there's this incredible mystery in the archaeological record that suggests something else might have been driving this whole train, something spiritual.
Yes. This is one of the most exciting shifts in archaeological thinking in the last 30 years. And it all centers on a single mind-boggling site in southeastern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe.
So set the scene for us. What is it? What does it look like?
Okay, so imagine it's 1995. A team of archaeologists is digging on a dusty hilltop in a remote part of Turkey, and they start to uncover these massive T-shaped stone pillars. And I mean, they are huge, up to 5 meters high, weighing 7 tons apiece.
So like Stonehenge.
Like Stonehenge, but much older and in many ways much more intricate. These pillars are covered in beautiful, sophisticated carvings of animals. Lions, scorpions, vultures, foxes. It's an incredible artistic achievement.
Okay, so they find this, and they assume it must be from a similar period to Stonehenge, right? A settled agricultural society.
That's the logical assumption. Stonehenge dates to about 2500 BC. That's a society that had been farming for thousands of years. They had the food surplus, the social organization, the settled population required to build these huge monuments. So the archaeologists at Göbekli Tepe assume it must be from a similar time, or maybe from the Byzantine or medieval period.
But then they date it.
And the carbon dating comes back. And the date is 9500 BC.
9500 BC. That's right at the dawn of the agricultural revolution.
It's before the dawn in this particular region. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. In the oldest layers of the site, there are no houses. There are no granaries. There's no pottery. There are no agricultural tools. Just this massive, monumental temple complex built by foragers.
Wait, hold on. How do hunter-gatherers build a 7-ton pillar complex? To quarry and move and erect those stones, you need hundreds, maybe thousands of people working together for a long time. You need to feed them. You can't just say, hey guys, let's take a 3-week break from hunting gazelles to go drag this giant rock.
Yeah.
They would starve to death.
The logistics seem completely impossible for a standard, small foraging band. To build this, different tribes must have come together from all over the region. They needed a massive, reliable food supply to sustain the builders and the priests and everyone else, and this leads to a truly mind-blowing theory.
It has to do with the location, right?
It does. Geneticists, through DNA mapping of modern and ancient grains, have traced the origin of domesticated einkorn wheat, one of the very first crops we ever farmed, to the Kreissadag Hills.
And how far away is that from the temple?
About 30 kilometers. It's basically next door in archaeological terms. So the new theory completely flips the arrow of causality. The old view is always village first, then you get a food surplus, and then as a sort of cultural luxury, you build a temple.
Göbekli Tepe suggests
Temple first.
religion drove the invention of farming.
It seems incredibly likely. The theory goes that a visionary leader or a group of priests had this powerful religious idea. We need to build this holy site to connect with our gods or our ancestors. The people came. They were inspired. But to feed the massive workforce needed for the project, they couldn't just rely on random gathering.
They had to intensify their food production. They had to organize it.
They were effectively forced to start deliberately cultivating the wild wheat that grew in the nearby hills just to keep the whole religious project going.
That is just. It's profound.
Yeah.
It means we didn't domesticate wheat just to fill our bellies. We did it to serve our gods. We trapped ourselves in a lifetime of hard labor, not for survival, but for the sake of an ideology.
Which you could argue makes the tragedy even deeper. We sacrificed our physical well-being and our freedom, not just for more calories, but for a cultural symbol.
Speaking of sacrifice and tragedy, we have to talk about the other victims in this story. We focused entirely on humans so far, but the agricultural revolution was an absolute catastrophe for animals. And I don't use that word lightly.
No, you shouldn't. This is arguably the darkest chapter of the entire story. We usually tell the story of animal domestication like a Disney movie.
Mary had a little lamb.
Exactly. The animals are our friends, we protect them from the wolves, and in return, they give us wool and milk. A lovely symbiotic relationship.
But the reality wasn't symbiosis. It was subjugation.
It was brutal, systematic subjugation. To domesticate an animal, you fundamentally have to break its spirit. Take a wild sheep or a wild bull. These are complex, alert, often aggressive creatures. They have intricate social hierarchies. They are curious. They have a strong will to survive on their own terms.
None of which works for a farmer.
No. A farmer needs an animal that is docile, slow, and above all, compliant.
So how do you get from a wild, aggressive auroch to a placid cow that just stands there and lets you milk it?
Through generations of selective slaughter, The process starts with selective hunting. You follow the herd. You kill the most aggressive males first because they're dangerous. You kill the most curious females, the ones who always wander off. Who do you leave alive?
The slow ones, the submissive ones, the ones that are easiest to manage.
Precisely. And over generations of this process, you literally breed the curiosity and the fight and the independence out of their DNA. You create an animal that is biologically incapable of surviving in the wild. You create a dependent.
And that's just the genetics.
Yeah.
The day-to-day treatment that's described in the research, frankly, it's hard to read. It's stomach-turning.
It is. But we have to look at it to understand the full picture. Take the dairy industry, even in its earliest forms. In nature, a cow or a goat only produces milk after giving birth, and only for its calf. If you, a human, want that milk for yourself, you have to break the most powerful bond in nature, the one between a mother and her child. You have to take the calf away.
And ancient societies came up with some truly horrific ways to manipulate this biology.
They did. The source material mentions the Nur tribe in Sudan, for example. If a calf died, the mother cow would get distressed and stop lactating. So what would they do? They would stuff the dead calf's skin with straw to create a crude puppet. They would smear this puppet with the mother's own urine to trick her powerful sense of smell and present it to her just to keep the milk flowing for the tribe.
That's monstrous. And what about the Tuareg camel breeders?
They needed the camel milk to survive in the desert, but the calf, naturally, drinks too much of it. So they would puncture or even cut off parts of the young camel's nose and upper lip.
Why?
It made the act of suckling incredibly painful for the calf. So the calf would stop drinking out of pain, leaving more milk for the humans.
It's just torture. There's no other word for it.
It is systematic torture, designed for maximum extraction of resources. In New Guinea, some pig farmers would gouge out the eyes of their pigs.
Why on earth would they do that?
A blind pig can't wander away. It stays where you put it eats, it gets fat, and it waits to be slaughtered. It turns a sentient being into a piece of meat-producing machinery.
And this brings us right back to that cold, brutal concept of evolutionary success.
It does, because if you look at the raw numbers, cows, pigs, and especially chickens are the most successful large animals on the face of the earth. There are over 1 billion cattle. Over 25 billion chickens alive right now.
In terms of DNA copies, the chicken has absolutely conquered the planet. The agricultural revolution was a jackpot for the chicken genome.
A massive, unprecedented jackpot.
But for the individual chicken.
It is a life of unparalleled misery. A modern broiler chicken lives its entire short, painful life in a cramped cage, often unable to even spread its wings, pumped full of hormones to grow abnormally fast, until it's slaughtered at just a few weeks old.
The source makes this really poignant comparison between a happy rhinoceros and a miserable calf.
Right, and it's a powerful thought experiment. Consider a wild rhinoceros. There might only be 20,000 of them left in the world. They're on the brink of extinction. So from a species perspective, they are failing. But that individual rhino, it roams across vast territories, it has autonomy, it engages its senses, it lives a full, complete rhino life. Now compare that to a veal calf, locked in a tiny crate where it can't even turn around, deliberately kept anemic to make its muscles pale and soft for a gourmet steak.
The calf species is a massive success.
Yeah.
But its individual existence is a nightmare from birth to death.
Exactly, and it forces you to ask a really uncomfortable question. What is the point of it all? If success just creates a world filled with suffering, maybe we're using the wrong metric for success.
That feels like the philosophical core of this whole deep dive, doesn't it? The agricultural revolution proves, in the starkest possible terms, that the success of a species often comes at the direct expense of the individual's happiness and well-being.
We built a machine, a global system of farming that is incredibly good at producing more people and more food, but it doesn't necessarily produce better lives.
It's such a sobering realization. We started this episode thinking we were going to talk about wheat, and we've ended up questioning the very foundations of progress and civilization. We've seen how we traded our health for calories, how we traded our freedom for a false promise of security, how we stumbled into the luxury trap, and how we dragged the entire animal kingdom down with us into a world of suffering.
It completely reframes our origin story. We aren't the triumphant masters of nature who outsmarted the planet. We're more like the unwitting enablers of a runaway process. We stepped onto a treadmill 10,000 years ago, and almost every major invention since then, the plow, the steam engine, the computer, has just made that treadmill spin faster and faster.
Which leaves me with one final and slightly terrifying thought for everyone listening to this. If the agricultural revolution was a massive fraud that traded individual well-being for collective numerical growth, are we in the middle of doing it all over again?
You mean with the digital revolution?
With technology. Exactly. Look at AI. Look at the data economy. We are building these huge globe-spanning systems that are incredibly efficient. They process more information. They connect more people. They generate more wealth than ever before. But look at us. Are we happier? Are we less anxious? Or are we just like that first farmer, breaking his back in the hot sun to feed a system that fundamentally does not care about him?
We might just be the hunter-gatherers of the digital age, naively thinking we're planting a seed of progress, when actually we are building the walls of our next, much more sophisticated cage.
Are we the masters of our algorithms, or are we just becoming the domesticated apes for the next phase of evolution? An evolution that cares about data, not about us.
That is the question, and if the last 10,000 years of history are any guide, we probably won't like the answer.
On that cheery note, try to enjoy your lunch. Maybe skip the bread. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
A pleasure, as always.